My dear child, I just removed your name from a mailing list you did not know you were on, and the mail that has been circulating about you among people whose conversations you were never invited into will no longer reach your address as of tonight. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to reveal is not a general spiritual teaching about gossip or judgment. This is about a specific list, a specific circulation, a specific group of people whose private discussions about you have been operating in the background of your life, shaping things, forming opinions, constructing narratives, in spaces you were never given access to enter and never given the opportunity to defend yourself in. The list was real, your name was on it, and the mail was arriving. You sensed it. The conversations that stopped when you walked in, the group dynamics that carried a different texture when you were present than when you were not. The specific unsettling, never confirmed awareness that a version of how certain people talked about you existed somewhere you could not reach. A version that did not match the faces they showed you when you were standing in front of them. My beloved child, you could not prove it because the list operates invisibly. A mailing list does not announce itself to the names on it. It circulates quietly. The mail arrives at your spiritual address without a return label, producing effects you could feel but could not trace to a source because the source was a circulation you did not know your name was part of. Your name has been removed. The circulation continues among the remaining names, but what circulates there no longer reaches you, no longer affects you, no longer has a delivery route to your life. Stay here. What I reveal next is how long your name was on the list and what the mail that was arriving at your address was actually doing. Type removed from list if you have been carrying the unprovable suspicion that people were discussing you in spaces you could never enter, and God just confirmed a mailing list existed. Your name was on it, and as of tonight, the circulation no longer has a delivery route to your life. The mailing list was not created recently. Your name was added to it during a season when the people who created it still had legitimate access to your life, which is why the mail has been arriving at an address that once belonged to a version of you that no longer exists. My beloved child, I need you to understand how the list was formed. Mailing lists are not built by strangers. They are built by people who had close enough access to your life to obtain your address, your spiritual address, the coordinates where the things said about you land and produce effects in your emotional and relational environment. Strangers do not have that address. Only people who were once close enough to be given it possess it. The list was created by people who once had legitimate proximity, and the proximity is what gave them the address. My dear one, the mail has been arriving at an address you no longer live at. Not physically, but spiritually. The version of you that lived at the address where the list was sending its circulation is not the version of you that exists today. You have moved. You have grown. You have relocated your internal identity to coordinates that the old address does not represent. But the list was never updated. The names on the list still send their circulation to the address they obtained during the season of proximity, an address whose mailbox still receives what is sent to it, even though the person it was addressed to has long since moved to a different location inside their own life. This message was not released for everyone who suspects they are being talked about. This was aimed at the one person whose specific mailing list was created by specific people during a specific season of proximity, people whose access to the viewer's address was once legitimate, but whose continued use of that address to circulate opinion, narrative, and judgment has been operating without authorization since the season of proximity ended. The access expired. The list did not until tonight. Type access expired if you just realized the mailing list was created by people who once had legitimate proximity to your life, and the circulation has been arriving at an old address that no longer represents who you are, because the list was never updated when the season of proximity ended and the access that obtained the address expired. I have been watching the mail arrive at your old address since the list was created, and the watching is what prompted me to authorize the removal that happened tonight, because the volume of what was being circulated about you in spaces you could not enter reached the threshold where the effects could no longer be absorbed without producing permanent damage to the person receiving them, my dear one. Not from outside the postal system, from inside it, positioned at the sorting facility, where the mail from the list passes through before it reaches your address. Reading every piece, registering every opinion, documenting every narrative that the people on the list were constructing about you in the specific conversations you were never invited to participate in. I read what they said, every word of it. My beloved child, I watched you sense the arrival of each piece of mail without being able to identify its contents. The heaviness that descended at specific intervals without a traceable cause. The subtle shift in your confidence that occurred on days when the circulation was particularly active. Days where the group was discussing you with an intensity that produced a corresponding intensity of effect at your address. You felt the mail arrive. You could not open it because the envelope was invisible. I chose you for this message because the sensing was accurate. Every time your spirit registered the weight of an incoming opinion that you could not prove was being formed about you, the feeling that something was being said, that your name was in someone's mouth, in a room you were not in, that a version of you was being discussed, that you had no ability to correct. That sensing was the spiritual equivalent of hearing the mail slot open and feeling the weight of an envelope landing on. The floor of an address you did not know was still receiving deliveries. My child, the sensing was not paranoia. It was the detection system registering incoming mail at an address that should have been closed when the proximity ended. Type not paranoia if God has been positioned at the sorting facility reading every piece of mail the list was circulating. And every time you sensed an invisible heaviness descending without traceable, cause it was the detection system registering the arrival of opinions and narratives being delivered to an address that should have been closed when the season of proximity ended. I know what the invisible mail has been doing to the specific part of you where your sense of how others perceive you is formed, my beloved child. The mail did not arrive labeled. That is the cruelty of a mailing list the recipient does not know they are on. A person who receives visible criticism can evaluate it, can weigh its accuracy, can accept what is true and discard what is not, can respond to the source with the defense that direct accusation permits. Visible criticism is painful, but it is addressable. Invisible mail is not addressable, because the recipient does not know its contents. My child, I watched the invisible mail produce a specific kind of damage that visible criticism cannot generate. The damage of effect without content. You felt the weight of the opinions without knowing what the opinions were. You registered the shift in the atmosphere without being able to identify what specific narrative had been circulated to produce the shift. You absorbed the consequence of judgments passed in rooms you could never enter by people whose faces showed you something entirely different from what their private circulation was constructing about your identity. The gap between the face and the circulation was the wound. The face said, "You are welcome here." The circulation said something else, and your spirit was receiving both signals simultaneously. The public signal that said you were accepted, and the private signal that said you were being discussed. And the contradiction between the two produced the specific, low-grade, never fully resolvable unease of a person whose detection system was registering incoming mail that their conscious mind could not open. You could not resolve the unease, because resolution requires access to the content. And the content was in envelopes your hands could not open, because the mailing list was operating at a level your conscious awareness could not reach. Feeling the weight without knowing the words. That has been your specific burden. And the burden has been heavier than most people could carry. The deepest wound the mailing list inflicted was not the mail itself. It was the isolation of carrying a suspicion you could never voice, because voicing it without proof would have made you look like the person the circulation was probably describing you as, "My dear child." You wanted to say something, more than once. The sensing was strong enough that the words formed inside you. I think they are talking about me. I think there is a conversation happening that I am not part of. I think the way they behave in front of me does not match what happens when I leave the room. The words formed. The words died before they reached your mouth, because saying them out loud felt more dangerous than carrying them silently. My beloved child, I watched the words die at the threshold of your mouth, with the specific grief of a God who knew the words were accurate, and watched the person whose accuracy was being confirmed by divine intelligence suppress the truth, because the truth sounded paranoid to a world that does not believe in invisible mailing lists. The world told you, if you cannot prove it, do not say it. And the world's standard silenced the one person whose sensing was the closest thing to proof the situation was going to produce. You were silenced by the absence of evidence for something that was happening every day. I know the specific relationship where the gap between the face and the circulation was widest. The person whose public treatment of you was warmest, while their contribution to the private circulation was most active. The person whose presence in your life felt simultaneously welcoming and unsafe, producing the specific crazy-making. Am I imagining this confusion of a person whose detection system was screaming incoming mail, while their conscious experience was registering nothing but kindness? My dear one, you were not imagining it. And the person whose warmth was the widest gap from their circulation is one of the names the removal has now separated you from permanently. Type silenced truth if you carried the suspicion in silence, because voicing it without proof would have confirmed the very narrative the circulation was constructing. And the person whose public warmth was widest from their private contribution to the list is one of the names God's removal has now permanently separated from your address. Now that the delivery route is closed and the mail has stopped arriving, everything about the weight you adapted to is being permanently recalibrated, because a system that has been absorbing invisible mail for an extended duration requires a full recalibration when the mail ceases, in order to recognize that the baseline it was operating at was artificially heavy, my dear child. This is what happens when a name is removed from a list whose circulation was producing effects the recipient had adapted to as normal. The adaptation masked the weight. The masking made the weight feel like the natural density of the recipient's life. And the removal of the weight, the sudden cessation of incoming mail that was contributing to a heaviness the system classified as just how things feel for me, produces a recalibration whose first reading says this is lighter than anything I have ever experienced as my normal. The lighter feeling is not new, it is original, and original was hidden beneath the mail. My beloved child, the recalibration is restructuring your emotional baseline in real time. The heaviness you carried was not your natural weight. It was your natural weight plus the cumulative weight of incoming mail, from a circulation that was adding density to your atmosphere at intervals. Your system could not distinguish from the density your own life was generating. Your life was not as heavy as it felt. The mail was adding weight your system was counting as yours. The areas of your life where the heaviness was most concentrated. The relational spaces where the suspicion was strongest. The interactions where the gap between the face and the circulations was widest. Those areas are experiencing the most dramatic lightening because those areas were receiving the highest volume of mail from the list's most active participants. The heaviest areas are becoming the lightest, because the heaviest contributors have lost their delivery route. Type "not my weight" if you just realized the heaviness you adapted to as normal was not your natural weight, but the accumulated density of invisible mail being delivered by a circulation whose removal is now revealing that your actual baseline is lighter than anything you have experienced since the list was created. Let me show you what your life looks like now that the mail has stopped and the recalibration has revealed your actual baseline. Because a person operating at their true weight, rather than their mail-inflated weight, moves through the world with a capacity the weighted version could never access. My dear one, the first thing that changes is the relational clarity. You have been evaluating every relationship through a filter contaminated by the mailing list effects, a filter that could not distinguish between the suspicion produced by the circulation and the intuition produced by genuine relational assessment. The incoming mail was creating noise on the same frequency your discernment operates on, and noise on the discernment frequency produces false readings that make safe people feel unsafe and unsafe people feel ambiguous. The noise is gone, and the discernment is clear for the first time. My beloved child, the mornings change immediately. You have been waking into the weight. The first conscious moments of each day, registering the accumulated density of mail that arrived at your address during the night, when the circulation was most active. Because the people on the list were most available for discussion during the hours you were most available for receiving the effects. Tomorrow you wake into the recalibrated baseline. The morning density is absent, and the absence of morning weight will produce a specific, almost startling lightness that the adapted system will need time to recognize as normal. The lightness is normal. The weight was artificial. Your capacity for new connections is expanding because the bandwidth the mail was consuming is being released. Every piece of incoming circulation consumed a unit of emotional processing power that your system was diverting from available relational bandwidth to incoming mail processing. The processing was invisible, the bandwidth loss was real, and the loss was reducing your capacity for new connections by the exact amount the circulation was consuming. The bandwidth is back, and available bandwidth attracts what consumed bandwidth could not. People are going to notice the recalibrated version of you before you explain the removal, because a person whose invisible mail just stopped arriving carries an atmospheric lightness that the weighted version could not produce regardless of how well they functioned under the accumulated density of a circulation they never knew was landing on them. My beloved child, the ones who interacted with you during the weighted season, who sensed the heaviness without being able to source it, who detected the specific atmospheric quality of a person processing something they could not name, who perhaps even attributed the density to your personality rather than to the invisible mail that was adding weight to your presence at intervals. Nobody could track. Those people are about to encounter the unweighted version. They will say something is different. They will mean the mail stopped. My child, there is a specific quality a person carries when the opinions being formed about them in spaces they cannot enter are no longer reaching their address. It is not the quality of ignorance, of not knowing what is being said. It is the quality of disconnection, of the lines between the saying and the effect being permanently severed, so that what is said no longer produces weight at the address it was previously being delivered to. Disconnection from unauthorized opinion produces freedom, and freedom on a person is unmistakable. New connections are going to begin forming in the cleared space, the removal created. There are relationships that could not form during the waited season because the density the male was producing was occupying the relational bandwidth those connections required to initialize. The connections were approaching your coordinates. The bandwidth was consumed, and the consumed bandwidth was rejecting the new connections the way a full mailbox rejects incoming delivery. My dear one, the mailbox is empty now, and what arrives at an empty mailbox is fundamentally different from what bounces off a full one. Type mailbox cleared if you believe the removal is producing an atmospheric freedom that others are detecting, and the relational bandwidth the invisible mail was consuming is now available for new connections that could not form during the waited season, because the density of unauthorized opinions was occupying the space those connections needed to initialize. I need you to understand why the mailing list was created about you, rather than about someone else. Because the creation reveals something about what you carry that the people on the list could sense, but could not comfortably coexist with, my beloved child. Mailing lists about a person are not created around people who produce no reaction. They are created around people whose presence in a group dynamic produces a specific disturbance. Not the disturbance of conflict, but the disturbance of contrast. A person who carries something at a frequency the group cannot match produces an atmospheric contrast that the group experiences as discomfort. And discomfort that cannot be addressed directly is addressed indirectly, through circulation, through private discussion, through the construction of a narrative that explains the discomfort in terms that relocate its cause from the group's inadequacy to the individual's deficiency. The narrative was never about your deficiency. It was about their discomfort with your frequency. My child, what you carry at the identity level produces a response in environments that are not calibrated to your frequency. The response is not hostility in every case. It is the specific, cannot quite be comfortable quality that a person operating at a higher frequency produces in people whose frequency is lower. Not because the higher frequency is aggressive, but because its presence makes the lower frequency visible to itself. Your presence made them visible to themselves, and visibility to oneself is uncomfortable for people who prefer the narrative the circulation was constructing. My dear one, the list was about you because you were the frequency the group needed to discuss in order to maintain their comfort with their own. The discussion was not a response to your failure. It was a response to your light. And light that produces discomfort in people who prefer dimness will always generate a circulation whose purpose is to dim the light through narrative rather than confrontation. You were discussed because you were bright, not because you were wrong. The doubt surfacing right now is wearing the disguise the silence trained you to dress it in. The argument that you are being dramatic and that people do not actually sit around discussing you in private because you are not important enough to warrant that level of attention. My child, it sounds like this. I am not significant enough for a mailing list. The idea that multiple people have been circulating opinions about me in a space I could not enter assumes I occupy more space in their lives than I actually do. This is my ego inflating a suspicion into a narrative that makes me more central to other people's attention than the evidence supports. People have their own lives. They are not spending their private conversations on me. That doubt just used humility as a weapon against accurate discernment. And weaponized humility is the most effective silencer the mailing list ever deployed. My beloved child, the doubt is using the same logic the silence used. The logic that says if you cannot prove it, and if believing it makes you sound self-important, then the mature response is to dismiss the sensing and accept that the weight you have been carrying has no external source. The mature response is not always the accurate one, and accuracy outranks maturity. The mailing list did not require you to be important in the way the doubt is defining importance. It required you to be discomforting. And discomfort does not require the person producing it to be famous, significant, or central to the group's lives. It requires them to carry a frequency that makes the group uncomfortable enough to discuss the discomfort in private, rather than addressing it directly. You were not discussed because you are important in their framework. You were discussed because you are disruptive to their frequency. And disruption produces circulation regardless of whether the disruptive person considers themselves significant enough to be discussed. Type accurate, not dramatic. If the doubt just argued you are not significant enough to be discussed. And you now understand that the mailing list was not created because of your importance, but because of your frequency. And a frequency that disrupts the group's comfort produces private circulation, regardless of whether the person carrying it considers themselves central enough to warrant the attention. The suspicion was never paranoia. It was the accurate functioning of a detection system that was registering real mail, arriving at a real address from a real circulation. You were never given the proof to confront, because the mailing list was designed to operate without the knowledge of the name on it. My beloved one, I need to permanently separate the sensing from the label, the silence attached to it. Your system classified the suspicion as potentially paranoid because the suspicion existed without supporting evidence, and unsupported suspicion in the rational framework your conscious mind operates under is categorized as irrational. The framework said, without proof, this feeling is a malfunction, and the malfunction label was placed on a detection system that was performing its host function with complete accuracy. The system was not malfunctioning. The system was detecting. My child, the absence of proof was not evidence that nothing was happening. It was evidence that what was happening was operating at a level the proof-gathering system your conscious mind relies on could not access. The mailing list does not generate proof. That is its architecture. It circulates opinion, narrative, and judgment through channels that produce effects at the recipient's address. Without producing documentation, the recipient can hold up as evidence of the circulation's existence. No proof was available, because no proof was designed to be available, and the absence of designed unavailable proof is not the same as the absence of activity. My dear one, every instinct that told you something was being said was an instinct operating on accurate data received through a detection channel the conscious mind could not verify. The data was real, the channel was real, the mail was real, and the label of paranoia that the silence forced you to apply to your own accurate sensing was the most damaging piece of mail the list ever delivered, because it taught you to distrust the one instrument that was telling you the truth. The instrument was right, the label was wrong, and the removal just proved the instrument. The removal just went into effect, and the first thing you are going to notice is the absence of a weight you did not know had a source until the source stopped sending. My beloved child, something shifted today, not in your relationships, not in any visible dynamic you can point to, in the weight, the specific, low-grade, always present heaviness that your system had adapted to so completely it registered as normal rather than as incoming mail. That weight is lighter right now than it was yesterday, and the lightening has no visible cause, because the cause was invisible, and the removal was performed at the same invisible level the list was operating on. The weight is lifting, and the lifting is the first evidence of the removal. My dear one, I need you to understand what happens when a name is removed from a mailing list that has been circulating for an extended period. The removal does not announce itself to the other names on the list. They continue circulating. They continue discussing. They continue constructing the narrative they have been building about a person whose name is no longer receiving what they are sending. The circulation persists, but the delivery route is severed. The mail continues, the delivery stops, and the difference is freedom. I have been preparing this removal behind every season of your silent carrying. While you were absorbing the effects of conversations you could not prove were happening, I was at the postal system level, documenting the circulation, tracking the delivery routes, building the case for the removal that the threshold authorized me to execute tonight. My child, the threshold was specific. The volume of mail being delivered to your address reached the point where the cumulative effects were approaching a damage level that my protection over your life could not permit to continue. The removal was not optional, it was protective. And the protection activated the moment the volume crossed the line. Type weight lifting if you felt something shift today, a lightness without traceable cause. And you believe the sensation is the first evidence that God removed your name from a circulation whose invisible mail was producing a weight your system had adapted to, so completely it registered as normal until the source stopped sending. Heaven just pulled you out of a group chat you did not know you were in. And the title carries that specific language because the mailing list was not a passive archive, but an active, ongoing, regularly updated circulation, whose participants were contributing content about you at intervals that corresponded to the moments you felt the heaviest, without being able to identify why, my dear one. The correspondence between their activity and your heaviness was not coincidental. It was mechanical. The mailing list operates on a delivery system that produces effects at the recipient's address, proportional to the volume and intensity of what is being circulated about them. High-volume circulation produces heavy delivery. Low volume produces light. And the fluctuations in the weight you were carrying without traceable cause were tracking the exact fluctuations in the list's activity. Your heaviest days were their busiest, and you could never have known. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to the specific suspicion you have been carrying. The title says group chat because the circulation was not a one-way broadcast. It was a multi-participant exchange, a conversation among multiple names who were all contributing their assessments, their opinions, their versions of who you are, based on interactions with you that they discussed among themselves in the space you were never invited to enter. The group was active, the chat was ongoing, and your name was the subject of a thread that had been running longer than you suspect. My child, the thread contained things you would not recognize as being about you, because the version of you that existed in the circulation was not the version of you that exists in reality. It was the version the participants agreed upon, the consensus narrative constructed by people whose individual observations of you were filtered through the group's collective bias before being added to the thread. The consensus version of you was never accurate. It was agreed upon. And agreed upon and accurate are not the same thing. The delivery route has been severed at the infrastructure level, and the last piece of mail from the list that will ever reach your address is passing through the sorting facility right now, being stamped with the words, "Return to sender by hands," that carry the authority to permanently close a delivery route that should have been closed the day the proximity ended. My beloved child, I need you to feel the finality of what is happening, not a temporary interruption in the mail's delivery that will resume when the list's participants notice the removal and attempt to re-add the name, a permanent closure. The kind that is executed at the postal infrastructure level, where the routing codes that connect your address to the list are deleted from the system rather than merely suspended. Deleted routes cannot be reinstated by the senders, only by the postal authority, and the postal authority is the one who ordered the deletion. My dear one, everything has been building toward this closure. The seasons of sensing without proof, the carrying of suspicion without voice, the adaptation to a weight whose source was invisible, the threshold being reached, the documentation being compiled, and now the severing, the permanent infrastructure level, return to sender stamped disconnection of every delivery line running between the circulation and your spiritual address. The last envelope is being processed, and processed means it will be the final piece of incoming mail from that list that your system will ever register. My child, after the last piece passes through the sorting facility and is stamped and returned, the delivery route will be closed permanently. The circulation will continue among the remaining names. The discussion will persist. The narrative will carry on being constructed in rooms you never entered. But the construction will no longer arrive at your address. The effects will no longer reach your system. And the weight will no longer land on a person whose only offense was having their name on a list they never asked to be added to. Type return to sender if the last piece of mail from the circulation is being stamped and returned right now, and the delivery route is being deleted at the infrastructure level by an authority whose closure cannot be reinstated by the senders, meaning whatever continues to be discussed among the remaining names will never again reach your address or produce effects in your life. The last envelope was stamped, the delivery route is closed, and your name has been permanently removed from a mailing list whose circulation was producing effects at your address that you were absorbing without knowing the source, without seeing the content, and without ever being given the chance to respond to a conversation that was constructing a version of you in rooms your feet could never enter. My beloved child, this is the moment the postal infrastructure confirms the deletion, the moment the routing codes that connected the list's circulation to your spiritual address are erased from the system, with the finality of an authority whose decisions are not subject to the sender's appeal. The moment the mail stops, permanently, the mail has stopped. Feel the silence. Heaven just pulled you out of a group chat you did not know you were in. The title is not a dramatic spiritual metaphor. It is an operational report from the postal authority who discovered a name on a mailing list that should not have been there. A name whose address was obtained during a season of proximity that ended, but whose listing was never updated to reflect the ending, and who executed the removal with the quiet, non-confrontational, infrastructure-level precision that the postal system provides. No confrontation was needed. No explanation was given to the list's participants. No dramatic spiritual showdown between the viewer and the people whose circulation was shaping things. A name was simply removed from a list, and the removal severed every line of connection between the circulation and the one whose name was on it. My child, the silence you are feeling right now is not emptiness. It is the specific acoustic quality of an address that is no longer receiving mail from a source that was delivering weight disguised as nothing. The nothing was something, and the something just stopped arriving. The group chat continues. You are no longer in it. And the removal changes everything.